Hello, everybody. Bonjour, tout le monde. Bienvenue. Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Sammy here from CertiCraft with the StateCraft episode 40. Wow, we're on 40 already. That's cool. I didn't realize we'd had so many episodes. Um, the Yeah, I'm excited to introduce Pierre to you guys in a little bit here, but before we introduce our guest and get into the conversation that we're going to have, um, I'll share a little bit about the state of craft and CertiCraft. I'll do a land acknowledgement. I'll do some housekeepings, and yeah, then we'll get into the discussion. Um, StateCraft, as some of you here who are repeat viewers know, it's a discussion on the state of the legal craft cannabis industry, and we try to find just interesting people all across the industry, all across the country, who have differing perspectives, differing just points of view, places they come from, things they're working on today, everything from lawyers that will take the government to court to try to change regulations on the federal level, to policy advocacy organizations, to producers, to insurance brokers, even just and the government. We've had a few different governments as guests a few different times, and yeah, we really just want to facilitate interesting discussions and give our guests the opportunity to share whatever they think is important. And that's why we do find lots of varied guests to come through. The State of Craft is hosted by CertiCraft. CertiCraft is a company trying to help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive in the regulated market. And we do it primarily through our platform that's also called CertiCraft, that makes the headache of Health Canada and the CRA go away for licensed producers by just taking care of all of the things that you need to do for you. And if you're curious about that, we'd love to hear from you. I live and work in Nelson, BC, in the foothills of the Rockies. And where I live, it's the traditional unceded territories of the Sinixt, and through intermarriage, the Tanaha people. And in my time here, I've been really saddened to learn about kind of the history of how people were treated here, with quite a lot of forced deportations and slaughter, and the population of thousands that once lived here is now less than 10. There's been a lot of really gross stuff done by both the church and the government in this area here. Interestingly enough, and sadly enough, a large part of it, as I've learned, is because the Sinixt are a matriarchal society, and any society, indigenous society, that was ran by women and led by women tended to be more on like the slaughtering, murder, death side of how they were treated, versus the patriarchal ones that were more acceptable in the eyes of the colonial structures that existed. Wherever you come from, wherever you live, I encourage you to discover and learn the histories of the first people on the land that you're on. I think that's the first step to any kind of meaningful reconciliation. And yeah, that's all I'll say about that topic. Before introducing Pierre, I just want to kind of take a note that we have a chat section here. I see some of you, Nick, hi Nick, are already saying stuff there. Please say hi, interact in there. It's a lot more fun when we have people chiming in. And if you have any questions for Pierre, we have a separate dedicated questions tab. Go ask your questions in there. You can upvote the questions that you want to hear answered, and we'll go through at the end in order of most popular. So that's it on the housekeeping front. Without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Monsieur Pierre Leclerc, whose name I might be mispronouncing because my French accent for names isn't the best. I bet it's Leclerc.
You're close enough. You're close enough, Sam.
Comme ça?
Leclerc, exactly. Thanks for having me, Sammy. Hello, everyone.
You're welcome, Pierre. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I understand that you're having quite a day today, so I really appreciate that you have taken the time to be here despite the myriad of challenges that that you're having right now. So thank you so much for that.
Hey, it's a very dynamic industry. We won't complain about it. It's a good sign when we're busy.
Yep. So Pierre, before we get into it, I'd love for you to take a minute or two to introduce both yourself personally, who you are, what your history is, what brought you to the cannabis industry, and as well what AQIC is, the organization that you represent here.
Well, I myself have been in the private sector for over 20 years prior to my political engagement, which started in 2014. So I've been working from the silvicultural businesses to the passing through the lighting sector to the AI sector, and in 2014 I decided to join Prime Minister's QR team. I've joined Deputy Premier Thériault back then. So I worked at the public safety department. After that, we went to the economic department, and then I went to the health department, where I was serving as a chief of staff for the delegated minister, responsible for the cannabis bill. So I worked with an incredible team in Quebec to draft the actual legislation. Now I'm trying to undo what I did a few years ago. But hey, back then we had our own conception of cannabis, and we were really focused on public health issues and nothing else, And we have to remember that back in 2017, 2016. A minority of Quebecers would agree with the legalization of cannabis. So we were one of the most.
Has that changed?
It has changed. Now we're back. We're not. We might not be at the same social acceptability than BC, but we're nearby. So things have changed big time in Quebec. So we went from probably 38% up to 68% now. So
That's incredible.
It's actually a shift in the from a social perspective in Quebec. So that's for myself. So how did I get involved into the cannabis industry? Well, first I used to live in BC. So you live in one of the most beautiful town in Canada. It's an amazing place. I spent a lot of time in Nelson and Caslo and all around the South Kootenays. Yes, I did.
Cool.
So yes, I did. I did sort of encounter cannabis in in my teenage age in the South Kootenays. But anyways, because of my job at the Quebec government, I got involved with the legal cannabis industry. So I had the chance to meet with a lot of people that were involved in or stakeholders that were involved in the legal cannabis sector. And by 2020, I think, something like that, I had conversation with Michel Timperio, who was the founder of the AQIC. He used to be Neptune Wellness CEO, but he founded the AQIC in 2019, and they hired me in 2020. We knew who we were. We had, developed a relationship back then. So
and sorry, for those of
what
us
do we
who
do
are
at
watching,
the AQIC?
and for those of us who don't know what AQIC is, it's Association
There
Québécois
you
de
go.
l'industrie de cannabis. C'est comme ça?
Almost. That's what it used to be. We changed the name 2 months ago, so now it is Association Québécoise de l'industrie du chanvre et du cannabis, which is in English Hemp and Cannabis Industry, Quebec Hemp and Cannabis Industry Association.
Okay.
So we've included the hemp because under the actual legislation, as soon as you extract something from hemp, it becomes cannabis. And we had a lot of our members that we have a lot of our members that are hemp growers, and they wanted to be represented within the AQIC. So we changed the name and we changed a little bit our vision and our mission. It's still pretty much the same, but we included hemp. And we've also started the International Federation of Cannabis and Hemp Associations, because when you go on a global level, there is it's all gray zones. It's what is hemp in a country is considered cannabis in another one. So pretty
Yeah.
much for us, when we say cannabis, we say hemp as well, but we want to make sure that everybody understood. So the AQIC is the association, a commercial association. Um, the idea is to represent, of course, the Quebec cannabis and hemp um, industry, and to make sure that we have a voice to contribute to a responsible um, development of the industry. We're facing a lot of challenge, and we've come to realize that there was lots of commonalities between different businesses or stakeholders in the industry. So the idea is to be the voice and to represent them and to be recognized as the official voice of the Quebec hemp and cannabis industry within the province, so on a provincial level, federal level, and international level.
Cool. Pierre, so I was in Montreal for my first time, in Quebec, really for the first time a few months ago. That's
Yeah,
where we met.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and in my time there, a lot of the producers I talked to, they made a point of expressing that things were much more challenging in Quebec. That there was like unique challenges they had that the rest of Canada didn't really face. Can you speak to that at all? Do you agree with that statement? And if so, like what is different about Quebec?
Depends the way you look at it. So, first, I'd like to say that it is very challenging for every single LP in Canada, whether you're in Quebec or not. I think it is a sort of phenomenon. It's a reality we can observe from coast to coast. So, whether we talk about legislation or not, it is fairly difficult for any cannabis business to be sustainable right now. So now there is differences in Quebec and the rest of Canada, of course. Now, what I'd like to say here is that there is what I consider a misunderstanding or a misconception of that reality. We do have our particular challenges, and I think it is a little harder for Quebec companies, but not because of the legislation, because of the way the legislation is enforced, and yeah. So that's the first distinction I'd like to make. So from a legal perspective, the only real difference we have, well, the age. So it's 21 years old to be able to buy cannabis products instead of 18 or 19, depending of your province. We don't have any topical products. We don't have any vapes, and we have a 30% THC cap. So that's pretty much the big differences. From
So
from
question
Yeah,
question for you. The 30% THC cap, is that like for extract too?
yeah, it's for every single cannabis
For
product.
everything. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. So if you want to have a dab pen in Quebec, well, you won't have a 90%
Yeah.
resin to put in.
So I find it very fascinating that topicals isn't legal, because I would imagine that's one of the easiest things to like recommend, because put it, you can help an injury and not get high from it. So I find that very surprising that that's one of the things that hasn't been allowed in the Quebecois market.
Yeah, that's because of the way the government. Uh, it's the way they understand the legislation. So for them, their mission is to migrate uh, cannabis users from the illegal market to the legal market, right? That being said, what they have in mind here is pretty much dry flower, hashish, extract, stuff like that. What we had on the legacy market. So when it comes down to topical products, which are not really used for recreational purposes, you don't really get high on CBD cream, right? So it's more or less a wellness product. And the government don't want the SQDC to sell wellness products because for them, by doing
Interesting.
so, it would banalize the use of cannabis, and then maybe you would see an increase in the cannabis use in the province if we were to banalize some of the cannabinoids. So that's pretty much the reason why the SQDC is not allowed to sell topical. And you're absolutely right. I mean, uh, it makes no sense at all, but that's what our government, the government who's there right now, because They changed the regulation in 2019, I believe, and they do not want to introduce that category of product in the province, and that's pretty much because they think it's not the purpose of the SQDC to sell products that are not made for recreational purposes. But that's not what the act says. It's not what the law
Yeah,
says.
it's
The law's
just like
talking about
the perspective of
cannabis,
the
not
current government.
yeah. There you go.
But it's also like that's also like kind of a challenge when like one of the other things about Quebec that is unique and different from a lot of the other provinces is that you can't have private retail. There's only the SQDC. So then if the SQDC is being required to only sell recreational, then that kind of blocks anybody who wants something that's like more health oriented. I guess you can do medical. I'm assuming you can still do medical sales within Quebec if you have that license.
Yeah, well, we do have a lot of medical sales in Quebec. I mean that is
Yeah,
federally regulated. So the Provincial Cannabis Act does not regulate or does not touch the the federal medical cannabis system. That's
yeah,
completely apart. So we are able to get the medical cannabis as it is the case for every single other Canadian outside
yeah,
Quebec. That's not a problem. What is a problem is all those products that are sold right now. I would say in the recreational or anyways outside the medical system, but are developed and are sold for wellness purposes. Well, the SQDC won't sell those products.
do you think that's something that might ever change, or does it seem pretty stuck in that kind of a mindset?
It will depend on a lot of factors. So, I mean, I would need to have a how do you say in English in boule de cristal, a crystal ball, whatever.
Crystal ball, yeah.
There you go. To give you an answer, but what we're working on right now is to take out of the actual cannabis legislation or system some of the non-intoxicating cannabinoids that could be sold as CHPs, cannabis health products, as food supplement or natural food or OTC products, so drug without any prescription, something like that. There's a lot of model we can work on, and Health Canada is working on. I mean, they don't have the answer yet because you cannot do any medical claim under the actual act for cannabis products unless you go through the medical prescription drug system. So, which
Yeah,
is the case for Sativex and also, as you know, for those products. So, as as for the AQIC, would rather work with Health Canada to find another distribution network for those products. I think it would be way easier for everyone to take that out of the end of the cannabis distribution network that we have right now. That's one of the solution.
yeah,
Is it going to change? Where at some point, for the SQDC anyway, because it's a crown corp and it's a monopoly, they will have to take a decision whether they go there or not. Because um, I mean, it's a government owned company, and they cannot let the gray market or illicit market, illegal market, name it the way you want to name it. But right now, every single person that orders CBD creams, well, in Quebec, they're criminals. They're breaking the law. Makes no sense at all. So at the end of the
yeah.
day, the SQDC is going to have to take a decision one day or another. I don't think it's going to happen for a couple of years, but I surely think that we could see within a few years some I would say I have to be careful here. I won't say wellness because we're not allowed to say so under the federal act, but some product that are not necessarily designed for recreational purposes, say it that way. And I think we're going to see it happen more and more at the SQDC.
What about like? Because for me personally, like THC makes me paranoid and anxious, so I don't use it anymore. I used to use it quite a bit when I was younger, but I've given it up for that reason. Um, And so every once in a while, like I come across growers who grow flower that's very CBD heavy, CBG heavy, that doesn't have very much, like maybe maxes at 2 or 3% THC. And if there's
Yeah.
like a big ratio of CBD to THC, then I can handle that. And in the BC market, there's not a lot of that, but there is a little bit of pre-rolls or eighths bags or whatever that you can find in stores that do have that. Um, does the SQDC allow that if it's flour that's not high THC, or is
They
even that
do.
seen? Okay,
They do have actually hemp pre rolls. So to be
okay,
considered as hemp, it has to be below 0.1%. So they do have CBD flower.
okay,
I think they have CBD herbal tea. I'm not sure they still have some in their portfolio, but they used to have it.
yeah.
They have CBD oil, so different CBD extracts. So they do allow those products.
It just has to fit within the product categories that they're allowing. Basically, is what it comes down to.
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely. It has to fit
okay,
there. So if you ask me, is it a big category? The answer is no. And are the extracts in Quebec a category that from a business point of view perform? It does not perform at all. But neither the government or the industry has put any emphasis on those products. Right now,
yeah,
it's all about price and THC. So it's fairly hard to bring people on all those type of products as we speak. I think one day it's going to happen, but
yeah,
as we speak, it is just not the case, and it's fairly hard to get out of that price and THC um, dynamic that has occurred in the past, I would say, 5 years, but it has been worse and worse for the past 2 years or so.
yeah. 100%. Okay, so we've talked a lot about kind of the category challenges within the SQDC. We talked a bit about this monopoly that the SQDC has, which has its own set of challenges, I imagine. Maybe a question for you: Does alcohol have the same thing where it's a monopoly, or is private sales allowed in Quebec for alcohol?
Well, it's a monopoly, but it's a monopoly like it is in Ontario. So it's not a real monopoly. You can still, it will be controlled by a board, but you can still sell and resell alcohol into restaurants or whatever. You need an alcoholic beverage license, and then you can resell it. So in Quebec, there's about, I would say, 15,000 alcoholic beverages resale points or sell points, but there is only 100 or even a little below 100 sale points for the cannabis. So there's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And you cannot have a license or a permit that would be delivered by a cannabis board or so. It has to be through the SQDC network. So it's fairly different than it is for alcohol, which makes the SQDC the only real monopoly in Quebec, because you can privately produce your own electricity, but you cannot even produce your own cannabis unless you have an ACMPR in Quebec. So it's the only real monopoly is the only real monopoly in Quebec is
Yeah.
the SQDC. It's really
Is
different than it is for alcohol.
Yeah. No, that was something I was curious about because I remember like walking around Montreal, I kept seeing SAQC, SA,
SAQ,
SAQ. That's what. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Société Société des Alcools du Québec, which would be the
The
Quebec
equivalent.
Alcohol Society.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah,
and so and then, but I didn't notice any private liquor stores, but I also wasn't looking for them, and so I
there's
wasn't
none.
sure. Oh, okay. There's no private. Okay, so what are the resellers then that you're talking about?
Well, there's the grocery stores. They can sell some wine category. They can sell beer. They can
Okay,
sell everything that is made out of hop, but they cannot sell spirits.
okay.
So you're going to see it in convenience store, grocery stores, stuff like that. So there is other retailers than the SAQ, but that would be mostly within the convenience store or the grocery stores.
And they're
And
they're probably buying from the SAQ, aren't they?
They are buying from the SAQ indeed.
So the SAQ kind of has a monopoly as well. If
Well,
everybody has to buy from them, isn't that
you can
in
buy
essence?
straight from a brewery, but still there will be a tax that goes to the government. It's
Okay.
a mixed system
Okay.
in Quebec. But that
Okay.
brings me back to the one of your first questions when you were talking about the Quebec specific challenges, when we're talking about the monopoly. Um, so in Quebec, if you cannot get on the SQDC's shelf, if you don't have a SKU at the SQDC, you have nowhere to sell your cannabis. It's impossible for you to convince anyone else to buy and sell your cannabis. So that's one of the challenges, because we don't have any farm gate, we have nothing else. So if a Quebec producer does not get his product into the SQDC, it's impossible for him to sell the product. So he has to go into other provinces. And it can be quite challenging to get into other provinces, especially when you don't have a big cash flow, or you don't have the experience and all the know-how to export in other provinces. So that's really one of the things. And the other thing is, the SQDC do have to have conversation with the government in the way they will not consider appreciate the legislation. So when we say not attractive to children, say, well, in
Yep.
Quebec, not attractive is really not attractive. So it's not really that legislation is different. It's the way, it's the interpretation of those words that are really different than it is in other provinces. So that those challenges, they are different in Quebec than they are in other provinces for our producers, of course.
Are there any other like high level examples of challenges that are unique to Quebec that you want to bring up?
Unique. Well, I name most of the big differences on the from the legal perspective, or from the legal side. Um, One of the big challenges we have is that the Quebec government consider the cannabis industry like the tobacco industry, and they too apply the HMO tobacco rules over the cannabis industry, which means that we're
What
not
does HM? Oh yeah, go ahead.
World Health Organization. So they do have that fight against tobacco use, right? And there's a global agreement on how government should treat the tobacco companies. So they apply those rules to the cannabis industry in Quebec. It's the only province that does that. The federal government doesn't do it, which means that we don't have access to any program or measures. It means that, say you have, I don't know, a battery company, whatever, and then you decide to invest into cannabis. Well, if any of the financial arm of the actual government finds out, they will cut all their help and financial solutions, could be loans, could be whatever, participation into your mother company. So that it goes all the way there. You cannot have any tie with the cannabis industry to be allowed to or to apply on any Quebec government program or measures. So that's one of the big issue. The other issue is, um, they don't do any, or they don't accept any lobbying from the industry, which means the civil servant, they won't even engage into conversation. So we do have a lot of conversation and space where we can, or forums where we can have conversation with the federal government. We do with BC, Ontario, Alberta, but we cannot do it with our own government in Quebec. They won't even talk to us. So that's
That's so bizarre.
it. Well, it's not bizarre when you think, when when you consider that in their mind, there's no difference between the plant and the final product, and that every single product made out of cannabis is or represent a danger for the human health. They don't see anything else in there. So that's what they have in mind. So when you apply the tobacco rules, well, then you get into that indeed really bizarre situation where instead of bringing the consumers or helping them to shift on products that may cause less risk for their health, they don't even do it. So that's weird.
Yeah. And it's sad too, because it's like the only reason that cannabis is legal is because of its medical properties. Like it's the
That
patients who have been struggling with cancer, with leukemia, with multiple sclerosis, with all these different conditions, who have found first off comfort for their extreme symptoms, and then in many cases actually have healed as a result of the
yeah,
cannabis use. That's what's allowed in the late 90s, early 2000s, the first medical legislation to come through, and then those were all the fights that happened with the Supreme Court of Canada
yeah,
against Health Canada to establish these rules. It's always been medical. And so I find it both very fascinating on one level and very sad on another level that with the legalization of cannabis across all the provinces and the federal government, medical has largely been ignored. Now, in Quebec, it sounds like it's taken to the extreme where it's like a denial of medical benefits. Like in BC, I don't think there's a denial that there is medical benefits. It's just like not really legislated. You know, there's no, you can't talk about medical benefits in a store context. There, you can't have a storefront for medical patients. It has to all be recreational. The
yeah,
LDB as well is focused on recreational products first and foremost. I don't know if they do or don't have a wellness side to what they have. I mean, you know, they do offer things like bath bombs and things like that that are very much exclusively wellness.
yeah,
So in that sense, I guess there is some support there, but you know, by and large, Health Canada and the provinces have ignored that aspect of cannabis, and I just think that's sad because it's such an incredible medicine, and I really hope to see that shift across the entire country into one where we don't run away um, from that. But I guess you know what you one of the things you talked about in your introduction about yourself, about your work when you were working with the health ministry and how it was really is this focus on public health, like the public health perspective and the traditional um, Western medical system perspective in the past 80 years or so has been one that's been very uh, stigmatized and against cannabis and sees it as a bad thing. But not before 80 years ago. Like in the past, medical associations were all very much for
yeah,
cannabis, used cannabis medically. So there's a very big shift that happened between the 40s and the 60s where it was very, very, very stigmatized with like some very serious campaigns against cannabis, largely from the paper industry, the nylon industry, the clothing industry, uh, the timber industry, a lot of the industries that were
yeah,
being challenged by hemp specifically, not cannabis. And of course, cannabis and hemp being very similar, they were all lumped together. And cannabis being something that could get you high was used as the way to like make hemp be something that was taken off market. But that's a whole other story. But I just find it very, 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 very sad that this is the reality we find ourselves in right now. I guess since you have had that experience of on both sides, you know you were in government in public health ministry, public safety ministry, and you were working on the cannabis file in the health ministry of Quebec, and now you're representing an organization that represents I think over 100 licensed producers in Quebec.
yeah,
Is that
yeah, over 100 now.
yeah, over 100 licensed producers, and you are you guys are very well organized. Like I definitely appreciated and noticed how the level of organization you guys have compared to your typical industry association in the cannabis industry in other provinces. You guys, like, to me, are like a level above where anybody else is at from my observations.
Well,
I'm
that
curious.
thing,
Go
but
ahead.
on that one, most of those associations are partners of the AQIC, so I won't judge of agree or disagree with you. I will let it to your judgment, but I think they're all trying hard, to be honest with you. And
Totally. I'm
one
not. I'm
of
not saying I'm not trying. I mean, I'm involved. I'm a founder of some of these
yeah,
organizations.
so
So
there you go.
I'm.
So
I
I've
like.
been lucky
We are
enough.
trying hard.
I've been lucky enough to have founding members such as Origine Nature and other members, Rose Life Science, but all the founding members of the KIC, they did put, they truly believed in it. They've put a lot of money in it, and they all agreed on a very wide um, um, vision of what the association should do and who the association should represent. So we've been able to put in place a very large ecosystem, not only from LPs, but from processors, from law firm, from suppliers, you name it. So it's a bit, so the entire ecosystem joined, I would say, the movement. So I've been lucky enough to have financial means and support from the cannabis decision maker in Quebec. And I've been lucky enough to have Jacques Farcy at the SQDC with and thanks to him to sort of recognize the AQIC as the official voice of the industry and to work together with the AQIC on different topics, different files, different issues. So yes, it's not all on me and all Mike Timperio or Caroline Chevlin that most people know in Canada, which is our member coordinator. But I've been lucky enough to have members that did give me the financial means to do so.
And I think that is the key difference, because like the organizations that I'm involved with are all volunteer run. We don't have budget like that, and a lot of the other ones that I'm familiar that I'm not involved with are the same kind of thing. It's mostly volunteer based,
Yeah.
and when you're doing things as a volunteer and there's not the budget to put towards operating costs, it's just very different what's possible. And that's, but it's regardless of how you get there, you guys are very well organized, and I've loved what I've noticed and seen from you guys in my time in Quebec and my time since. And what I'm curious about is you know now you're the CEO of AQIC, and before you were involved on this public health side of the cannabis. Can you kind of speak to your experiences being on both sides of the equation? You like alluded to it at first. You're like, oh, we created these policies, and
Yeah.
now I'm working to undo the policies that I created when I was in government. Like, I'd love to kind of hear more about like the perspective you guys had at the time in government and how that's changed since, why it's changed, what you wish you'd done differently. Like, I'd love to kind of like learn more about like that side of your history.
Well, first, when you work at the government, you work within the constitution of the department where you work. So when you're at health, you have to work under your field of responsibility, which is health, and you work with experts. So finance will try to make money with cannabis. Economy, if they want to do so, they're going to try to support the industry. But health, we have to protect the health of our population. Now, put the medical cannabis aside. We were talking about recreational or adult use, whatever we want to call it. Let's say adult use cannabis. Now, all the experts from around the world, they all agreed cannabis can be risky for human health, and they all agreed, or most of them, well, no, they all agreed on the fact that it is more dangerous when you're below 25 than it is when your brain is fully matured and stuff like that. So the way we were looking at it was truly not about industrial potential or health or wellness or anything like that. We were looking at product that can and do represent a danger for the human health. So when we did all those work, that's what we had in mind. Now, that being said, while we were doing it, and things were going quite quickly back then, the federal government wanted to do it on a really, really fast pace, and I think it was a good thing. Otherwise, it would have never happened. So we never had the time to put things on pause and have a reflection over cannabis categories. So what we had in mind when we were talking about cannabis was high THC flower and extracts, and rosin or resin, of course. That was it. I mean, we had nothing else in our mind. So that's why we went with such a legislation. So one of the things I would do differently is the categorization of cannabis within the act. I don't think it makes sense to have a legislation that has a whole plant approach. Cannabis and hemp are the same. So, and under the act, it is the same. So, um, uh, there's a legal name for the hemp for some of the cannabis species, because in my mind it's the same. It's the same plant. But other than that, they're the same. So we didn't have, we didn't take the time to think about it. And I think the federal government should really have a deep reflection. And I think they do so as we speak. So I don't see why non-intoxicating cannabinoids should be considered as cannabis. I don't see why all the industrial waste should be considered as cannabis. There's a lot we could do with a lot of industrial waste to integrate and to have a circular economy and integrate the industrial economic sector of hemp and cannabis. So that's one of the things I would really do differently, to be frank with you. Um, yeah, that's the main one.
Cool. Cool. This has been it's been a really interesting conversation. I like didn't I wasn't expecting to like enter half of the like zones of conversation that we did. It's I've been learning a lot, and it's interesting to kind of hear that perspective. Is uh is there anything from your time in the other ministries before health that touched cannabis at all, or was cannabis just once you got into the health side where that became part of your work?
Well, at the public safety ministry, it was an issue because every single fall there was all those, and you know what? Maybe that's one of the reasons in Quebec we didn't have such a positive appreciation of the cannabis. The cannabis industry in Quebec was mostly controlled by the organized crime, and the
Yeah.
organized crime have been quite violent with some of our farmers and the entire agricultural sector.
And
Um,
is this farmers like specifically for cannabis or farmers more
no,
broadly?
no, regular farmers, organized crime would threat them. Well, they would use their field and threat the farmers. That if they were to say anything or not allow them to grow cannabis within their field, they would pay the price for it, and some did. Um,
Oh no.
so so that the relationship with the cannabis industry prior to the legalization. So it's not, it was far from what it is in British Columbia and what it was in British Columbia.
Yeah.
Of course, there was some craft farmers that would sail to some more organized group in British Columbia, but I spent 10 years in BC. I've never seen any violence between those group and the growers. But in Quebec, it was the case. So yes, cannabis was a big thing at the public safety ministry, and we have a police integrated squad that do a lot of investigation, and they have a huge operation every fall, which is still there. Now it's a little different now, but yes, I've been involved in the cannabis, but it wasn't involved in a good sense. It was involved in the way that
Like
we were fighting against not
gang
only illicit
violence.
activities, but we were really fighting against well organized and brutal organizations.
Yeah. So has the gang involvement in cannabis? I imagine it must have reduced significantly since legalization, since now there's a legal option through the government to get cannabis, and it's much hard. Like it just seems like the risk and the like economic return on uh, doing the kind of things you're talking about and going to these farms and putting farmers in very uncomfortable positions to grow cannabis on their land. I imagine that's something that's happening less and less nowadays as a result of legalization. Is that the case, or is that still a challenge in Quebec?
No, no. I think for the agricultural sector, for the farmers, um, that we're behind it, and it's not the case anymore. Um, I think that the reality has changed quite a bit. Now, I'm not close to the police world anymore, so I don't have any information. But from what I can see and from what I hear, well, and there has been some police operations here where they've been able to seize over 25,000 kgs of cannabis. So no, there's the black market is still there, and I think they've changed um, their their resale targets. So from what I hear, cannabis is pretty much a how do you say une monnaie d'échange. They use it. They use it in exchange of guns and other narcotics from different countries. Um, so it is a trade good on the international level. So it's not really for the domestic market anymore. We've been really good at it. They're trying to export their production in other countries, but they use it to bring into Canada, well, persons, guns, and other narcotics.
Okay. To our audience, there's there's we're gonna wrap up pretty soon. If you've got any questions, please please ask them in the questions tab. Sammy, I'm seeing your comments there. I don't think that Sammy's talking about the about like kind of how you're talking about um the cannabis and its dangers that it has and associated with it. I don't get the sense, Sammy, that Pierre is saying it's exclusively the dangerous side. And in fact, like I remember Pierre being disappointed with like the lack of acknowledgement of the well-being side of thing. I think he was just trying to share like how the government was thinking about this and how it led to where it's at today. Pierre, I'll let you kind of speak
No,
to it more.
that's exactly it, Sam. I didn't have the chance to read the chat, but if people thinks that that's my understanding or that's what I'm thinking of it, it's absolutely not the case. But you were asking me how it was when I was within the government and within the Ministry of Health. So I'm sharing what people were thinking or the way they were looking at it, and when you ask doctors if there is any medical cannabis, most of them will say there is no such thing. The only medical cannabis for them that exists is the one that went through Health Canada and that do have a drug identification number on their product. I'm not saying that I believe, because here we're mostly in beliefs more than scientific proof. So, and something I'd like to add on it, because we were talking about the medical cannabis that after the adult use legalization, it has been sort of hard. We don't really put any energy on it anymore. I think it's a bit because of the industry. The industry has to shift back on it and invest money in it. We have to work and develop some wellness and some medicines with cannabis. But it's not the government that will do it. It's the industry that will do it. And everybody focus on.
But how can that happen if like in a place like Quebec, when the government's saying, hey, there is no medical benefits, we're not allowing there to be like a medical model in this province? How can the industry do that when there's such a like hard stance of no to well-being, no to wellness in this
Well, because of course
plant?
you cannot do it. You cannot do it with the dry flower, but there is way to work on different formulas, on different products, and use the actual path within Health Canada where we can try to develop. We cannot work on natural products. It's impossible within the actual legislation, but we can work on real medicine. And we did not put a lot of focus on that reality. The industry shifted towards the adult use market because I think there was more profits and more money there. but where we are at now, we're going to need the industry to rethink the positioning of the cannabis industry and to go back and do their work and try to develop cannabis medicine the right way.
I don't know how much I agree with that, Pierre, because the legislation that exists to facilitate the legal market that exists today is very recreational focused,
Yep.
and the licenses that exist within the medical space that exist, cannabis is the only medicine in Canada that is taxed, that has excise duty, that has all these extra things that create a lot of barriers for a lot of especially older people who are struggling with all kinds of ailments who need cannabis medicines. And the government's Health Canada has been very reticent to reissue licenses in the older medical frameworks that allowed people to have access to medicine. So it's one of those things where in order to be able to provide people with medicine in a way that's accessible today, you often have to do it illegally. Like the way, like I think of the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club, the first compassion
Yeah.
club in
Yeah. Yeah.
Canada, and we had Ted from that as a guest 2 episodes ago, and everything that they are doing is technically illegal. But they continue to do it despite the raids, despite the fines, despite the arrests, because they want to ensure that people have access to medicine. But not everybody's going to be willing to put up with millions of dollars in fines, regular raids, regular arrests, and I think that's one of the challenges that we have a ecosystem today that does not make it straightforward to do medicine. So I do understand on one level what you're talking about saying yeah the industry has to make it happen, but if it's so overtaxed, overregulated that you no longer can have medicine at a price point where your patients can afford it and you can have a profit, then that's kind of an unfair uh, an unfair approach, I think. I think it's got to be both together. The government has to open up to medicine and acknowledge it as yes, this is medicine is possible, and so we're going to treat this as medicine. We're not going to make this the only thing that's taxed, and so and so much greater tax than any other medicine out there. We're not going to do all these things that exist right now, and instead allow there to be a path for that. I like it's one of those chicken and the egg things. What comes first? They both have to
Yeah,
happen
and you know what?
simultaneously.
I deeply agree with you. Now, I've seen Luc Prévost saying that Dr. Carmen was prescribing, which is not prescribing; it's authorizing. So when a doctor or a medical person authorize cannabis, it's not a prescription; it's an authorization. There's a huge difference there. And of course, he was doing it, and he was doing it under uh, very exceptional circumstances. Um, but and that's the case. But even though he was doing it under very exceptional circumstances, they're not willing to recognize cannabis as a classic or controlled medicine. Uh,
Yeah.
and if I could, I mean, what I'd like to see the government do is to recognize cannabis as a medicine. Because right now, what we have in Canada is a judgment from the Supreme Court that forced the government to give access to what they call medical cannabis, which should really be called therapeutical cannabis. It shouldn't be called medical cannabis. It's not recognized as such, as so. So right there we have the wrong name or
But
for the medical.
The Supreme Court of Cannabis, Canada recognized it as medical, and a lot of people throughout the world do recognize it as
No, they
medicine.
recognize that there is a therapeutical benefit and that Canada has to give access. Now, it doesn't make it a medicine under all the regulation at Health Canada. So if I could change the things, of course, I would rather have a much more, I wouldn't say complex, but more accessibility to cannabis through a design that really recognized cannabis as medicine. And then we could have, of course, more challenge. There would be approvals and stuff to and study to be done, but at least people could have a real medicine without tax that could be reimbursed, that could be insured. Uh, Maybe it wouldn't be dry flower. Maybe it would be dry flower. I don't know. But right now we're right in between, and that's what causes, in my belief, that's what causes most of the problem. So we need a well structured medical cannabis path for the patients. We cannot keep work with something that our officials say, yeah, you know what, there's no such thing as medical cannabis. And in another end, the Supreme Court says, yes, there is such a thing, and you have to make sure that Canadians have access to medical cannabis. So that's what I'm talking when I say that there is a
Yeah,
lot of work to be done.
yeah.
We have to demonstrate that. We have to gather all those data, and we have to table it to Health Canada, and we have to change the actual system to make sure that we have financial you know, accessibility to medical cannabis, because right now it's not cheap for someone that needs it. It's a really expensive medicine. So yes, I would like the system to change, and there you go. So we're pretty much at the same place. It's just the mean to get there that might be slightly different.
So we have 3 minutes left. I know you have a hard stop here at the end of this thing. So I'm just going to ask the one question that was asked by Sammy, which I think is appropriate for where we've been talking about here. How can the government inform itself better about the facts related to cannabis? Particularly, how can the Canadian or Quebecois government canvass other countries to see how other nations are developing this very important medicinal and beneficial industry? And I guess to Sammy's point, there's lots of other countries that are focused on the medical side. They're not focused on the recreational side. And so that completely shifts how they approach their legislation. So, yeah, curious to hear your thoughts on that, Pierre.
And he's right. It's 99% of the other countries that are focused on medical cannabis. So what I'd like to say on that one is that first, Canada should put in place, they're making plenty of money with cannabis. So they should put a cannabis research fund in place. It shouldn't be at Health Canada. It should be under ICED, and the industry should have access to that. And I'm quite sure we would have amazing studies and amazing research. We would see amazing research and results coming out of such a fund. The other thing is the Canadian government have been a precursor, is it English? One of the first in the world to legalize medical cannabis and adult use cannabis. And Canada does not play its role of the leading nation globally speaking. So they don't advocate for their own policy, public policy, public health policy, which I think is doing great result right now. And when we're asking the federal government to play to be a key player on the international level, and to take its responsibility and make and share with the rest of the world, that's what we're talking about. So there should be cannabis forums organized by the government every single year or so, and they should invite other nations. We should share information. They should at least try to work with the industry and with non-government organization to make sure that we have those forums and we can share all those information, and we can all go forward. And well, there you go. Yeah.
Cool, Pierre. Thanks for that perspective. I have a lot more I want to talk about right now, but I know you've got a crazy day, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to take us past the time here. I really appreciate you being here. Maybe the last question I have for you is there anything about AQIC that's coming up that you want to share, or anything for anybody who's watching this? Because this is going to be watched quite a few times on YouTube in the next month or two. Is there anything that you want anybody watching this to know about AQIC?
Well, I'm gonna announce it on December the 13th, but I can well, first people can go on our website, aqic.ca, and we even have our app on the App Store or Android. So you're going to see our logo, AQIC, not the weather app, but the Quebec Cannabis Industry app. People can download it, and it's English and French, so people will be able to see everything we do. But we're going to have a new membership category, which will be individual members. It's going to be on a secured section of our website. So only people that it won't be that expensive, but only people that buys a membership will have access, and we're gonna have visit of our producers in Quebec. We're gonna have webinars. We're gonna have a medical section to give resources to the people that are trying to get into the medical cannabis. There's going to be a product catalog on our website. People will be able to be redirected where the products are sold in Canada. There's going to be anyway. As I cannot tell you everything that's going to be on that section of our website, but we are we are launching probably in January 2024 individual membership at the AQIC.
Cool. Thank you, Pierre. Appreciate your time here. Next up, episode 41, we have Kevin Varner from Royal Harvest. It's a micro cultivator here in BC who is in the process of transitioning into a standard. They bought a much bigger facility. They've had a lot of success with their craft cannabis and are taking things to the next level. I think they're getting into processing as well. So it'll be our first conversation with an actual licensed producer in a very long time. So it'll be good to kind of get back into having the people who we represent and care about and are the heart of the industry, really, is the farmers who actually produce the product that everybody else relies on. So excited to see Kevin, have him share his story and to have an actual like very beautiful success story, because usually the stories we hear about the struggles and the challenges and oftentimes the failure and the decision to like pause the license. So to have somebody not only be very successful on a small scale, but be so successful that they're growing and moving into a much bigger facility, expanding significantly. It's going to be nice to have that as a story that's shared instead. So thank you all for being here. Thank you again, Pierre, for your time.
Thanks a lot, Tammy. Thanks to everyone. Have a great day.
You're welcome. And for those of you who missed the beginnings, as soon as this stops, it'll replay and we'll put it on YouTube next week at some point. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.